The first question was, can you make a Pikachu? The second question was, okay, how big can you make a Pikachu? And then it was like, when can you make it? And I don't think there was any question about anything but Pikachus. And so, can Colossal make a unicorn? Yeah.
I'm Brian Hiatt. Welcome to the Rolling Stone studio live at South by Southwest. I'm really happy to be here with Ben Lamm, the co-founder of Colossal Biosciences, which is doing some pretty miraculous and freaky things.
Yeah, we get a lot of feedback, so.
Well, how many times have people brought up to you the quote from Jurassic Park, your scientists were so preoccupied with what they could that they didn't stop to think whether they should? Was that a daily thing?
Well, enough that we made shirts that just say preoccupied, and we wore them like 5 times, and everyone hated them, so we stopped. They're now like this secret culture shirt, like from the early days where we just had shirts that had a dinosaur and it said preoccupied, and some people liked it, not everyone did.
Since you are essentially aiming to bring extinct species back to existence, how much have you contemplated this should? How does that conversation work?
We have, we don't have this very specific list of criteria to bring back species, right? Like you start with, can you do it, right? Which I know is the first part of that meme. And then we spend a lot of time saying, okay, should you do it, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got an entire ethics group. We have an indigenous council. We have a conservation council. And so we actually have about 95 external people that we actually work with on that, right? And so when we did the direwolves, for example, it's like, okay, wolves are under attack. This is an opportunity to build technology to help wolves. Huge educational opportunity to talk about how wolves help ecosystems. Most people thought, direwolves were just mythical creatures from Magic the Gathering or Game of Thrones. So we thought it was a cool educational moment. And so, we spent a lot of time looking through the positives of doing these different species. But it is kind of this 3-dimensional kind of thing. We get lots of really weird requests. After dinosaurs, megalodons is on everyone's list. We're not working on megalodons. I don't even think there is megalodon DNA. The ocean's scary enough. But so there is a part of culture that is interested in some of the bigger, scarier things.
It's interesting because it's beyond interesting. It's fascinating. The way that you did the direwolves, I think that's the scientific term, did, right?
Yeah.
But
Extincted, recreated, resurrected, yeah.
The way you accomplished this was through CRISPR editing. And you've pointed out that if people object to that as sort of saying, oh, it's not a real direwolf, that actually, to bring it back to Jurassic Park, those weren't, strictly speaking, dinosaurs, even in the fictional story either. They used editing to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I did say, I did get a lot of feedback on this too. People love to give us feedback. And I said, look, if you don't think our mammoths are mammoths, that's fine. If you don't think our direwolves are direwolves, that's fine. But you should tell your kids that Jurassic Park's about, genetically modified frog birds. And it is true though, right? And so if you want to tell your kids that Jurassic Park's about dinosaurs, well then Colossal's making, dodos and direwolves. If you want to say they're genetically modified frog birds in Jurassic Park, well then we're creating cold-adapted Asian elephants using, genetic engineering and mammoth alleles across 1.4 million years of genetic divergence. So whichever sentence you want to say, it's up to you. It doesn't really affect us. And I think what's interesting is if you look at the grand swath of feedback that we get, we get a lot of attention, which is awesome. And when we think about the business, we care about creating impact, creating value, but also inspiration. So a third of what we're doing is trying to inspire the next generation to be scientists, get excited about science, because we miss the old school days like Bill Nye and volcanoes that using the baking soda and whatnot. We love those old school 80s science experiments, and so we want to bring those back. And so if you want to have a philosophical debate over naming and something that has a very deep and distributed evolutionary background, we're cool with that. It's not going to change what we do though. And I think the biggest thing that I think we frustrate people with is that we say, you have a right to call things whatever you want. We're going to stick to the script, but you guys can do whatever you want.
I guess I'm a little concerned, not with you guys, but in general at the prospect of someone vibe coding with CRISPR.
Yeah. I think, these technologies, very much like AI, are you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle, right? There's a lot of really interesting things that can come from all of this, especially with access to compute, AI, and CRISPR in the kind of broader synthetic biology industry. There's so many things that can happen. What's interesting is the same platform that can bring you mammoths and direwolves and dodos and everything can be used to build microbes to like eat plastics and break down plastics from the ocean. We did that. Can be used for human healthcare. Can be used to create drought resistance or heat resistant plants and animals and can help confer disease, right? So it has a lot of great use cases. Also has nefarious use cases, right?
People are worried about bioterrorism.
Yeah, and it's a real
Yeah.
thing, right? And I think that access to compute, data, AI, synthetic biology, some of these tools are readily available, and they're not expensive. You can do that. There's a whole biohacking movement where people are using some of these tools, in all kinds of interesting and strange ways. Not that I endorse in any way, but yeah, it is a new world, right? And one of the things that we're trying to show people is that it's not all scary. It's not all for medical use cases. Most people think about this as only for medical use cases, but I truly, I'm an eternal optimist, right? I really do believe that the technologies that we're developing at Colossal have vast applications even beyond healthcare and whatnot to solve really big challenges. And I think this kind of like dominion, like plastics, it's a huge one, right? Like, we ingest like a credit card size amount of plastics every single week, which is crazy. Like that's disgusting and weird, right? And so if you can, break the chemical bonds of plastic and make biomass, you can clean up the oceans, you can help with composting. Our first 14 pilots are all around textiles. Fast fashion, amazing in many regards, really bad in other regards, right? And so I think that, I'm an optimist, so I believe that like we as humanity can like out-innovate the take, right? And that's what we have to, because we are taking from nature, we are losing biodiversity, we're changing ecosystems, but I'm hopeful that we can like out-innovate like what we're taking.
Without ending up with a bioengineered version of like Snowpiercer.
Exactly. That's the dream. But there's governments that are using it. I mean, it's a weird world.
How are governments using it?
Yeah, I mean, so there's other governments from an adversarial perspective that are using these types of tools and technologies. You've probably read about things like the CRISPR babies and whatnot that came out of China. There's a general moratorium globally around leveraging these tools for germline editing, meaning edits that will then go into or could go into the next generation of people and affect the gene pool, because it needs to be better studied. I will say philosophically, I'm not against germline editing, but I do think that it needs to be very well managed, very thoughtful, and highly, highly regulated. And so we've taken the stance at Colossal that we won't work on, we even draw the line before humans, we won't even work on non-human primates, right? Because we don't want people to think that we're working on Neanderthals or Gigantopithecus or others. I did wear a Gigantopithecus shirt to a conference. I gotta stop wearing certain shirts. And then everyone was like convinced that we're making like King Kong, and I was like, we are not doing that.
I laugh, but that's terrifying. You bought
terrifyingly weird. Yeah.
You bought the company that cloned Barbra Streisand's dogs and does that for a lot of people. What are there technical barriers to human cloning or only ethical ones?
Truly only ethical.
Yeah.
The work that we do at Colossal, including with ViaGen, which is who we bought, it's much harder because we're working non-model species. So we're working on species that there's not a lot of data for, that we have to actually invent the cell conditions and whatnot. And so mice, pigs, non-human primates, humans, there's a lot of great data on it. And so for us, we don't touch anything in the human world. And we bought ViaGen because, to your point on technical challenges, most cloning has about a 2% efficiency rate. They have a 78% efficiency rate. So, I mean, they're so much further than anyone else in the entire world, right? And so we did that's first. And then people love their pets, and so we didn't take that business away. If you want to clone your dogs and cats, I mean, I got mutts, so, probably not going to listen to this podcast, so I don't know if I'll clone them. If they do listen to this podcast, I'm going to totally clone them. And so we don't want to take that away from people that want to continue to do that. So we let that business continue to run and support it. But really what's interesting is that of the 18 species that have been cloned, 17 of them were done by ViaGen. right? And so we think that endangered species cloning and production is something that's a way that we can out-innovate the take, right?
I've heard people speculate, is it possible that there are cloned human beings walking around in China that no one knows about?
I think that there's a lot of things that are highly likely.
Yeah, because when there's no technical barrier, things tend to happen, don't they?
Yeah, if you have no technical barriers and you have a fluid, if you have a government with different ethical standards than we do in the United States, then I think certain things are more, not possible, but more probable.
I mean, that's fascinating and a little scary.
Yeah, it is terrifying.
One of the things that's fascinating here is because, as you said, there's not a lot of information available for these extinct species. And so you're essentially kind of designing the idea of what they are. You could just as easily, I mean, couldn't you essentially give us a unicorn?
So 3 years ago, I was at South by thinking I was going to have a conversation about conservation. I think that it was like how de-extinction is saving elephants. I think that's what the title was. And the first question was, can you make a Pikachu? The second question was, okay, how big can you make a Pikachu? And then it was like, when can you make it? And I don't think there was any question about anything but Pikachus. And so, can Colossal make a unicorn? Yeah, we can, right? Like, I own the #1 horse cloning company. We understand more about coat color and variation than anything, right? We took a 73,000-year-old skull and found out what the direwolf fur was, and we made puppies, right? So I think we're pretty good at that. And so, never done anything with horns, but I'm sure we could figure it out. Probably easier to make a unicorn with 2 horns than 1 horn. And I don't know how you do placement, but narwhals or teeth. But yeah, so I'm pretty confident we could do it. It's like, but why would you? It's like, all we need is a headline of Colossal makes unicorn. Next day, small child gets gored by colossal unicorn, right? And so, because horses are crazy. And so I don't know if we would do that. I don't know what the true educational or technological or ecosystem benefit would be to do that. I'd much rather work on, and we're not working on this yet, but I'd love to. I'd much rather kind of do ancestral state reconstruction of painted horses and horses. We work with a lot of indigenous people here in the United States. I'd much rather than make a unicorn. How do you make a real authentic Mustang and work with some of the tribes to do that. I think that's more interesting. I think it has more kind of a global and cultural impact than a Pink Pony Club or whatever.
It's like heirloom tomatoes, but for horses. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I think they'd get it. Right. And so, but what's crazy is there is a lot of data in this DNA. Right. And so when we did the dire wolves, only about a fraction of the genome had ever been understood. We had about 500 times more than that, given some proprietary tools in AI models. I feel like every company now is an AI company. So you're like, oh, here I'm a spoon company that's powered by AI. So we don't actually talk or flex much on the AI side, but AI is critical to the entire process. And so we do ancestral state reconstruction models for the genomes, leveraging the data. And so we have to piece together this terrible, broken, awful confetti, puzzle pieces without even knowing what the picture is supposed to look like, and with missing pieces, and sometimes with pieces from other stuff in there, like microbes or contaminants, right? So it is an interesting problem it's a data problem that we use AI for. So we actually do, the good news is we are not really guessing. When we say, oh, we know direwolves are white, we knew they were roughly this size. We had certain things from a morphological perspective in the fossil record, but we actually get a lot of that data from the DNA, even DNA that's 12,000 or 73,000 years old.
Finally, what are your biggest personal ambitions for this company over the next 10 to 15 years?
So it didn't get as much press as dire wolves or woolly mice, which are pretty objectively cute, but we just launched our first BioVault, and we did it in partnership with the UAE and our partners there that are dealing with the war right now, unfortunately. And I'm very excited about it because part of our vision is outside of just bringing back species and rewilding them back into ecosystems and hopefully helping ecosystems and developing tools for conservation, is that we really want to build this kind of Noah's Ark 2.0 model where we build distributed biovaults all over the world. That coupled with our artificial womb work, which doesn't work yet, but hopefully will one day. When those two things work together, I think that we can productionize endangered species and have kind of this like living library of life. And then we can use synthetic biology to help engineer the species that we're causing to go extinct and then productionize them through artificial wombs. And I think that, if we do nothing else, I think that would be pretty great for humanity.
Yeah. Artificial wombs would also be huge for neonatology.
Yeah, absolutely. We think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Ben Lamm, thank you so much for joining us at the Rolling Stone studio live at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much.